I call to the order the 338th meeting of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and I welcome the distinguished delegation of the Kingdom of Morocco to the dialogue with Morocco. And we also have with us a representative from the National Human Rights Institute. I welcome civil society in the room and watching us over the internet, and I welcome guests to the committee. Honorable Head of Delegation, Basima Hakoui, I give you the floor for the opening statement on the Kingdom of Morocco.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
الواقع هذه المحطة من المحطات الصعبة على المسؤول أي كان هذا المسؤول حكومي من حيث تمثيل بلده وإبراز إنجازاته.
This is an opportunity for us, but it is of course a difficult situation for any official to fully reflect the situation in his or her own country as regards respective obligations under the Convention. Morocco is never ceasing in its efforts to aim to achieve development goals and to promote human rights with bold approaches and measures and ambitious programs. And I very much hope that I and all members of the delegation from Morocco will be up to the task of fully representing these efforts to you and giving all of this information to the distinguished committee, and that we can do so reflecting the reality of the situation in our country. President, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, first and foremost, allow me to express on behalf of the Kingdom of Morocco, as we take part in this first interactive dialogue on our country, our great appreciation to the Secretary General of the United Nations and to the Chair of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the members of this committee for all of the efforts that they are deploying to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. And I am delighted to be here to share with you those efforts deployed by my country in this area. Ladies and gentlemen, the Kingdom of Morocco has been unceasing in its constant commitment to protect and promote the rights of persons with disabilities. This is through signing the Convention and also acceding to the protocol to the Convention and the ratification of the two documents in 2009, as well as through all the different regulatory and legislative measures, including the 2011 Constitution, which stipulates in its preamble that we should combat all forms of discrimination on grounds of disability, and in Chapter 34 insists upon these rights and makes the public authorities responsible for establishing policies and plans to assist persons with disabilities in having access to all of these rights. We have made major efforts and achieved major results in the economic, social and cultural spheres. And in 2015, the government adopted a general integrated policy to promote the rights of persons with disabilities from 2016 to 2026. This was done through a participatory process with all of the different stakeholders, the governmental sector, national institutions, civil society organizations as well, disability organizations and experts. And this plan has different cross-cutting measures which cover measures to be adopted by all governmental bodies, and it also has different thematic chapters such as on good governance, covering the mechanisms to be implemented so that we can amend existing policies. Madam Chair, Morocco is pursuing its efforts to honour its commitments in this sphere. The government adopted in July 2017 an action plan on implementing the General Integrated Policy 2016 from 2016 onwards, through a participatory process and a human rights approach. And we had 24 workshops, and some 419 measures have been adopted. We have performance indicators for this plan as well, so that we can monitor achievement and we can make sure that we really achieve the necessary dynamic trends so that we can improve the situation of persons with disabilities in our country. As soon as the Parliament adopted Framework Law 9713 on the rights of persons with disabilities, and this was published in the official bulletin in May 2016, the government prepared the regulatory text necessary to implement this framework law. This framework law reflects an advanced notion of disabilities and focuses on functionality and the interaction between the person and the environment, and is inspired by Article 1 of the Convention, and adopts the definition of discrimination on grounds of disability pursuant to Article 2 of the Convention, and it also takes note of the evolutionary capacity of children with disabilities and the issue of integrated development and participation. As we've moved to crystallize this general policy at a national level, we have stressed the need for statistics. The second national survey conducted in 2016, pursuant to the Washington Group on Studies and Statistics, caused us to adopt an interactive model using international classifications of health indicators as adopted by the World Health Organization. We see in Morocco that 6.8 persons live with disabilities in Morocco, so that means that there are there's 2,264,671 persons with disabilities in Morocco. That means that each and every family will have someone with a disability, and we see that 0.6% of persons have a severe disability. There is qualitative and quantitative data which has been able to shed light on shortcomings and weaknesses in our policies, and we are happy to mention these in our report so that we can then move on to identify challenges clearly and find solutions to meet these challenges. Morocco is launching implementation of our plan to meet the SDGs for 2030, and we have focused in this work on the issue of disabilities in different workshops, focusing on a specific development model launched by His Royal Highness the King, His Majesty the King, so that we can face up to exclusion and tackle exclusion in the poor areas and rural areas, and to combat precarity in general. This plan seeks more resources for the social establishments to take care of those who are most vulnerable and to train people in the area of disabilities. There's also mechanisms adopted within this strategy to combat precarity, to provide technical assistance and to improve school attendance rates of children with disabilities, and also professional integration, and improvements to be brought to different centres and day centres. And the budget for these issues, for all of these measures, has increased from 2015 to 2017, including benefits to widows and the parents of children with disabilities receive direct benefits now as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Morocco pays particular importance to access and accessibility. This is a very important measure as we see it to ensure autonomy and full integration of children with disabilities. We have a law on access and accessibility which was adopted in 2013, and regulations implementing this were then adopted with minimum criteria for architecture, for urban development, for transport and communication. And then different regulatory orders have been adopted to implement this accessibility law. These seek to define the criteria and technical standards, and these measures should be promulgated this year according to our National Action Plan. Between 2012-2016, the government has implemented a program together with the World Bank to ensure accessibility in urban areas in 4 main cities. Marrakesh city was a model city, with accessibility equipment established in all the infrastructure of the city. On the accessibility of transport, a study was conducted and a document was drafted on the technical criteria for accessibility of means of public transport, and all the different considerations to be taken account of to serve the needs of persons with disabilities. The Moroccan railways have also adopted measures to facilitate access of persons with disabilities. In the media sector, the law on audiovisual communication provides for the need to provide access to those persons suffering from hearing impairment to programs broadcast through sign language interpretation. A program has been developed to harmonize sign language and to train sign language interpreters. Ladies and gentlemen, we have created a series of mechanisms to coordinate and monitor implementation and evaluate the different strategies in the sphere of the rights of persons with disabilities. And so the Ministry of the Family, Solidarity, Equality and Social Development, as the body responsible for implementing the governmental policy in this area, that is promoting and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities, has established a committee under the head of government to evaluate programs and strategies for persons with disabilities, and also to assess implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and its protocol. Efforts are also underway to establish a national observatory for ideas to be exchanged and data to be exchanged between all of the different stakeholders in this area, to contribute to evolving and following up and monitoring policies in this area, so to create a good evaluation mechanism. The Human Rights Ministry has also been tasked with encouraging the respect of human rights in the context of general policies and to draft reports cooperating with all of the relevant sectors.
باختصاصات وصلاحيات في مجالات الرصد.
The Constitution has allocated different functions to different bodies in different areas, such as the rights of persons with disabilities, the Ministry for Human Rights and the Economic, Social and Environmental Council are two of the major institutions. The Human Rights Council looks at disability issues from the point of view of decision-making processes, legislation, report drafting. A draft law on the National Human Rights Council has provisions which would give it the authority to monitor the situation of persons with disabilities very closely alongside the mechanism to combat ill treatment and torture. For decades, Morocco has faced challenge upon challenge as it has sought to promote its education system. A strategic vision for education up until 2030 has been adopted. The Superior Council for Education and Training and Scientific Research has raised the issue of schooling, school attendance, and in particular school attendance of children with disabilities. They have looked at the difficulties of access to education alongside all other children, and they wish to make sure that access is ensured to all of the education system. A new integrated approach, excluding no one on grounds of disability, is what we have sought through this policy. The Kingdom has made considerable efforts over the last decade in particular, which has meant that we have been able to see in schools 49.5% of those aged between 6 and 17, whereas in 2004 it was only 34% of children who were schooled, according to the national report into the situation of persons with disabilities of 2014. Integration sections have been created in schools, and some 8,000 boys and girls benefit from this. There are many initiatives which have been set up, and these are multiplying. In May 2017, we saw the latest initiative on the basis of a ministerial decision, which has made the diploma exams after primary school and secondary school more accessible. This favours an environment for school attendance and success in the exams. All of the candidates have really benefited from the changes brought into these exams. It really has facilitated their access to the exams and their success in the exams. Ladies and gentlemen, another challenge is access to the health sector and to enjoy quality services in the health sector. This is fundamental for persons with disabilities. The Kingdom of Morocco has established a series of measures in a law from November 2002. We established mandatory basic healthcare, universal healthcare of all children of insured persons, whatever their disability might be. This gives them the right to have unlimited access to the social security system, whatever their age. The Framework Law 9713 calls upon public authorities to have an early diagnosis of disabilities, to establish this diagnosis, and the same law stipulates the right to services, to treatment, to consultations, and to sport and rehabilitation. A sectoral plan on health and disabilities was established, and it is based on projects to promote different plans, the early diagnosis of illnesses which may lead to disabilities, and rehabilitation services for persons with disabilities, and strengthening basic training and continuous ongoing training for persons with disabilities, and to strengthen the legal framework for this work and awareness raising to combat stereotypes and discrimination. The government has also passed a law to combat persons with mental impairment, to combat any discrimination against persons with mental impairments, and this focuses on the respect of human dignity, confidentiality, the private life of individuals, and calls upon all professionals to have the free informed consent of each individual on their treatment, And if this is impossible, if all possible avenues for this have been explored, well, then there can be agreement by one of their family or somebody close to them. So this has updated the legal system to bring it more in line with a rights-based approach. It focuses on the right of persons with mental impairments to see their dignity and their rights protected. One of the major concerns for my country is the right to employment in the public or private sector, or to be self-employed, and in particular for persons with disabilities. A quota system has been revised so that we can make sure these quotas really are useful, in particular in the public sector. In 2017, a law was passed establishing the recruitment conditions for public service. Law 0581 on social protection for persons with visual impairment was passed, and Law 792 concerns the social protection of persons with disabilities. The purpose was to create laws which contain practical measures which really can allow the persons to be less marginalized, to facilitate their access to public service as other citizens. This through competitions specifically for them to fulfill the quota which I mentioned earlier. A national committee under the Prime Minister was created to monitor these competitive exams. Challenges remain as to the employment of persons with disabilities in the private sector, and we are trying to face up to these challenges through establishing contractual quotas when there are contracts between the public and private sectors. Law 6590 has a labour code of 2003 which explicitly condemns all forms of discrimination in employment. And when we look at remuneration, we see that the Social Cohesion Fund is supporting all persons with projects who seek to carry out their projects, to provide them with assistance if they are persons with disabilities through different cooperatives. We are trying to replicate this pilot activity, this pilot project, given there's a great demand for this kind of project. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathering experience and we are seeing more and more success. However, we are very humble when faced with the major challenges. When we look at the text of the Constitution, we see the role of civil society mentioned in all areas. The Constitution also mentions the participation of civil society in policy making as they exercise their right to participate in different areas. The different associations which are active in working with persons with disabilities are helping us to develop integration policies. We have regional workshops on this and different thematic workshops. We have exchanges of memoranda and the participation of these bodies in our work to codify law and to develop social assistance programs. Civil society are active as well in all awareness raising and information campaigns on access. Facilitating access is facilitating life was the title of the last campaign, and this is supported widely by civil society. We have seen great civic participation in disability activities. We have, some 20 years ago, just 50 organizations for persons with disabilities. We now have over 1,000, and we have some 35 networks of associations. These associations benefit from state support so that they can conduct different projects for persons with disabilities. These associations also benefit from the same support as other NGOs in the country. Support for those associations which help disabled children with school attendance received several thousand dirham, and this is a major contribution to school attendance of persons with disabilities, and awareness raising and information campaigns were conducted to promote programs training in the rights of persons with disabilities and raising awareness about services available. Turning to sport for persons with disabilities, the government, through the Royal University, is providing assistance, some 3 million dirham in 2011 and 8 million in 2016. All of these efforts demonstrate the national desire and commitment guided by His Majesty King Mohammed VI and implemented through his government to improve the situation in the field with the participation of civil society, which is so active. Between 2012 and 2016, we have been highly active, and we have sought to build on former progress. Today, our country has a strategic vision, has a national plan based on the results of research at the national level and based on our legislative framework and the monitoring mechanisms we have established. Now we are starting the next 5-year period, 2016 to 2021, and this is going to be 5 years of work in the field, providing extra stimulus to all of our efforts in this sphere. We have legal text to implement the framework law, which should be wholly implemented over these 5 years. We will continue with our workshops to focus on reforming rights and legislation and pursuing efforts to refocus social assistance to really target the specific needs of a person with disabilities, and also focus on respecting communication needs through unifying, harmonizing the national sign language. All of these different endeavors are ambitious ones. These require expertise and skills, and this is at the heart of our concerns. This is a prime concern for us. We need to make sure that we ensure this training and that we can replicate successful projects and programs throughout the whole of the territory, and this will be a major challenge. We're going to need a great deal of adaptation, and we're going to need a great deal of individual and institutional expertise, nationally and internationally. We will need local people involved, and we will need international partners involved as well. Combating all negative stereotypes and ideas about persons with disabilities is still one of our most serious challenges, and we can only overcome these problems through awareness raising and through being tenacious in combating discrimination. We have done it in our constitution, and we consider that this is a major challenge for us to change our culture and our behaviour, and we need to face up to this and to work on this in harmony with the requirements of the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We shall pursue the objectives of this convention, and to do so we established a monitoring system to monitor the implementation of the Convention. And this is quite promising, I believe, to help us overcome any shortcomings we have. Madam Chair, experts, ladies and gentlemen, my delegation and I remain available for all questions you have, and we are open to all proposals which you have to improve the situation of persons with disabilities. This is a vast area, and what efforts we make, whatever goodwill we have, this will remain a major endeavour and challenge for us to provide the right services to empower persons with disabilities and to give them the best possible life we can. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished head of delegation, Mrs. Hakawi. We are very delighted by this comprehensive introductory statement. I give the floor now to the representative of the National Human Rights Institute, Mrs. Khalid Ramli, for a 5-minute statement from the perspective of the National Human Rights Institute. You have the floor.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, committee members, Honourable Minister.
Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs, les membres du comité. Ça marche pas. Celle-là. C'est bon, il faut le. Allez-y. Avec celui-là. Madame la Présidente,
Madam Chair,
Mesdames et Messieurs, les membres du comité.
distinguished committee members,
Mesdames et Messieurs,
Honourable Minister, representatives from the Moroccan delegation, representatives of Moroccan civil society, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honour for me to participate on behalf of the National Council on Human Rights of the Kingdom of Morocco, to participate in this high-level dialogue in order to submit to the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities its opinions and recommendations on the situation of persons with disabilities in the Kingdom of Morocco. The National Council on Human Rights is a national institution which is independent and has A status as accredited by the Global Alliance of NHRIs. We have 13 regional commissions on human rights, and as an organisation we ensure the protection and promotion of human rights in Morocco. Bearing in mind the written responses of the Kingdom of Morocco to the list of issues, the Council hopes that its own contribution will be able to bring additional information and will be used as a reference point by the Committee while drafting its concluding observations. The Council welcomes the fact that on the 17th of July this year, we saw the approval of the Interministerial Commission to implement the strategy and the programmes to promote the rights of persons with disability within the National Action Plan 2017-2021. We hope that the implementation of its provisions will be reflected in the Finance Law of 2018. Having considered all of the various documentation and legal text, and also having examined the complaints and allegations of violations of the rights of persons with disabilities, the Council wishes to bring to the attention of the Committee the fact that despite undeniable progress in Morocco, there is still a lot to be done if we want to ensure the effective enjoyment of the rights of all persons with disabilities in a condition of equality, with respect to access to education, employment and social protection. In fact, despite the fact that we now have the right to an inclusive education enshrined in the Constitution, the Council notes with concern that persons with disabilities still have great difficulties and have barriers put in the way of their access to education. This is particularly true when it comes to registration procedures for schools and support measures such as assistance within schools and reasonable accommodation. This is why the Council would advocate the adoption of an inclusive education policy for all persons with disabilities, with no inclusion on the grounds of any type or degree of impairment. The Sustainable Development Goals should be taken into consideration, particularly Goal 4.5. When it comes to employment and employability of persons with disabilities, the Council calls for a cross-cutting integration within the provisions of the forthcoming financial law of measures and indicators relating to the inclusion of persons with disabilities in employment in the public and private sector. The Council wishes to draw the attention of the Committee to the attention of women with disabilities that suffer double discrimination, and they are not a priority when it comes to the different policies and programmes. Families of persons with disabilities are in a particularly precarious situation. Their rights are often violated, as are those of their children, and they are generally the ones that are entirely responsible for meeting the additional financial cost resulting from the disability of their children. When we consider access to social protection, the Council notes with concern that despite the existence of social protection, the range of care and services which are offered does not meet the needs of persons with disabilities. Prisons and detention facilities should take into consideration the situation of persons with disabilities, particularly when it comes to accessibility, access to information and communication. The Council regrets that the second National Survey on Disability, published in April 2015 by the Ministry of Solidarity, the Family, Equality and Social Development, did not include data on the population of detainees and prisoners with disabilities or of persons with disabilities that are in social protection centres. The Council notes that the limitation of legal capacity on the grounds of disability within Moroccan law is still a major barrier for persons that have intellectual disabilities or visual impairments when it comes to managing their financial or administrative affairs. The Council also would like to see the draft law relating to the reorganisation of the own council recognise the Council's competency to act as an independent protection mechanism, and hopes that this bill will be adopted at the next parliamentary session. The Council reiterates its admiration and respect to the committee members, and we very much hope that this constructive dialogue will help bring about the Convention's implementation in our country. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the National Human Rights Institute, and with that I give the floor to the country rapporteur, Mr. Danlami Basharo. You have the floor for 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm extremely delighted to have the honor to be the country rapporteur for Morocco, a country with over 32.2 million people as at the 2011 population census, with women slightly in the majority, proud in its diversity of peoples, cultures, and natural endowments, including world-renowned athletes. Although holding strongly to its Islamic religious identity, it is noteworthy that Moroccan people tenaciously hold fast to the values of openness, moderation, tolerance, dialogue, and mutual understanding among all human cultures and civilizations. Of note, too, is the fact that the distinguished Kingdom of Morocco has been the center for the adoption of several international agreements, including the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind and visually impaired or otherwise print disabled in 2013. Before I proceed further, I must warmly welcome to the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in Geneva for this constructive dialogue, the head of delegation, Madam Basima Hakawi, Honorable Minister of Family, Solidarity, Equality and Social Development, Mr. Hassan Boukili, Chargé d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of the Kingdom of Morocco in Geneva, and their very highly eminently distinguished delegation, and further appreciate the government of Morocco for submitting its initial report in a timely manner and also responding favorably to the list of issues presented to it by the committee. For this opening statement to be meaningful, I must extend warmly my sincere appreciation to all organizations of persons with disabilities in Morocco, particularly the collective that submitted their alternative reports, and also civil society organizations for the patient and painstaking manner in which they put together submissions and engaged frankly with the committee. Without your support to the committee, rest assured that our work will not achieve the positive results required. My round of gratitude will be incomplete without extending warm appreciation to the National Human Rights Council of Morocco as the watchdog of rights holders, which briefed me and the committee extensively to get an understanding of the challenges faced by all Moroccans, including persons with disabilities, in the attainment of meaningful human rights in the country. We honestly welcome these contributions from non-state actors as they add great value to our work. Suffice it to say too that we welcome all persons with disabilities in Morocco and beyond watching over the internet. I trust that at the conclusion of this very frank and open dialogue with your distinguished delegation, in which we seek for solutions to the myriad of challenges that constitute obstacles in the advancement of persons with disabilities in your country, we would restore pride in the motherland by all persons with disabilities who fervently share the goals and objectives of the Moroccan government and people to make full inclusion and participation in political and public life the hallmark of the nation for persons with disabilities, including in particular women, children, and persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. At the outset, it is necessary for me to point out certain important concerns that we would want the Moroccan government to take careful note of during the constructive dialogue, with a view to giving them serious and immediate consideration on return home. First of all, we note the tremendous improvements made in the field of human rights in the Kingdom of Morocco, particularly with the adoption of the Constitution in 2011, which makes the Convention an important reference point in the national legislation, and the commitment of the country to harmonize the national legislation with regard to the provisions of the Convention. We note also the adoption of the Framework Law 9713 on the protection and promotion of the rights of persons with disabilities in 2016 as the government's initiative towards the improvement of legislation concerning persons with disabilities. While this law is welcome, we note that it falls short in several areas which will need reform. It fails to include persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, which absence in the law impacts on the right to legal capacity in Article 12 of the Convention. Similarly, the law fails to take into consideration that the denial of reasonable accommodation is a form of discrimination on the basis of disability. Furthermore, it is noted that the state party will need to harmonize and update definitions of disability in various laws and policies, such as the Family Code, Labor Code, Penal Code, and Traffic Regulations Code, etc., to bring them into line with the human rights model of disability in the Convention. Secondly, I am quite concerned about the situation of women and children with disabilities. In several reports on the situation of women, we note that women with disabilities face double discrimination in the fact of being women, and secondly, women with disabilities that face violence on a regular basis. One report states that violence against women remains a widespread problem in Morocco, based on a 2011 national study which found that 62.8% of women in Morocco ages 18 to 64 had been victims of one form of violence or the other. Yet, the first annual report on violence against women, published by the Ministry of Solidarity, Women, Family and Social Development in 2015, did not mention women with disabilities, nor their lack of access to justice and their continued subjection to forced sterilization. In fact, two cases highlight the grave situation of violence and abuse against women with disabilities. And I quote, one NGO reported helping a 15-year-old girl with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities who was victim to rape and sexual exploitation by many people in her community due to her inability to distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate behavior or report the violence. As a result of the abuse, she became pregnant, several times and miscarried for lack of care. She now has 2 children that her family provides for. Although the family has filed several complaints, they have been dismissed on the grounds of lack of evidence. In another case, one NGO reported that, and I quote, a half-paralyzed woman was kept in a well by her husband and his brother. We note that children with disabilities form the majority of children in institutions that accommodate abandoned children. One study by UNICEF and the League for Child Protection states that 18.5% of abandoned children had disabilities. Not only do children with disabilities constitute the bulk of children in institutions, a government report states that only 41.8% of children with disabilities ages 6 to 17 are enrolled in school. In fact, due to inaccessibility of the learning environment, especially in rural areas, children with disabilities are left out of the education system. We note that with concern that the bulk of the education received by children with disabilities is NGO-driven with very little support from government. In the light of the above, we consider it necessary that government takes immediate and concrete measures to address the grave violence and abuse against women and children with disabilities and undertake its obligation to uphold Sustainable Development Goal 5.2 regarding the elimination of violence against women and girls in public and private life, as well as adopt a national strategy for deinstitutionalization of children with disabilities. Thirdly, the committee has often underlined the importance of sign language as an instrument to promote inclusion and participation of deaf and hard of hearing persons in all aspects of life, including education, employment, political, and public life. It is envisaged that this constructive dialogue will enable us to discuss the main challenges in the recognition of sign language as an official language in the state party and the commitment of the states to address this situation. Similarly, we note that Morocco, a country that championed the adoption of the Marrakesh Treaty to facilitate access to published works for persons who are blind and visually impaired or otherwise print disabled, is dragging its feet in ratifying the treaty. Finally, monitoring and implementation of the convention is a key obligation of the state party. An independent mechanism that meets the requirements of the Paris Principles is usually required to be the independent monitoring mechanism for this purpose. As the National Human Rights Council is the national monitoring mechanism for the convention, we expect that the government of Morocco would strengthen the capacity of the council with sufficient budgetary allocation and human resources, including ensuring its independence to fulfill its general mandate to effectively protect the rights of persons with disabilities. Furthermore, it is necessary for me to stress the importance of developing participation and consultation mechanisms for effective and meaningful participation, and I repeat, effective and meaningful participation for inclusion of persons with disabilities through their representative organizations on a regular basis, with the provision of sufficient budgetary resources to promote their meaningful participation, including women, children, and youths with disabilities, and persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. It has been necessary for me to raise these very few but important concerns at the outset so that they can be adequately addressed during our dialogue. I am sure that my colleagues will join me in fielding questions that will, at the end of the day, lead to the eventual emancipation and provide a full sense of belonging for all persons with disabilities in the revered Kingdom of Morocco, where all outdated and incompatible laws will be reformed to meet the standards of the Convention, where persons with disabilities will no longer be considered as a dishonor to the family, or hidden away and perceived to be the result of a divine curse, where women and girls with disabilities will no longer be subjected to violence and abuse, including forced sterilization, rape, forced abortion, or sexual harassment, and where full enrollment of children with disabilities in inclusive education settings will be realized. I thank you for your attention and look forward, along with committee members, to a very fruitful and constructive dialogue.
I thank our distinguished country rapporteur, Mr. Basharo, and this opens the round for the first set of questions on Article 1 to 10. Questions on Article 1 to 10. And my first speaker is Mr. Tadic. You have the floor. Maybe we can start with Mr. Ruskus. Can we start with you if your microphone is working? And I would like to ask the colleagues to be precise and short because we are running very late in time.
Yes. Permettez-moi de m'exprimer en français.
Allow me to address you in French, if I may. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and a warm welcome to the honourable delegation from the Kingdom of Morocco to the United Nations in Geneva. And my words of welcome also extend to civil society and representatives of organisations representing persons with disabilities in Morocco. First of all, let me say how much I welcome the extensive information in the State Party report testifying to all of the work that is done to benefit persons with disabilities. Allow me to ask a question and comment in respect of Article 4 of the Convention. Now, there is a framework law on the rights of persons with disability from April 2016 has been broadly criticised by civil society organisations as incompatible with the provisions of the Convention because it is far from guaranteeing the rights of persons with disabilities. It in fact imposes additional limitations to the rights of persons with disabilities. I have read the new law and I have seen some very controversial provisions in it. For example, the diagnosis and prevention of disability. And this is nothing that we find in the Convention. It's also a law which focuses on the medical model rather than a disability rights-based approach. There is also no provision on inclusive education. Quite the reverse. I can see encouragement in the law for specialised education. There is also no support for independent living within the community in the law. I would like to know on which measures civil society organisations representing persons with disabilities have been consulted in the drafting of the law and the provisions on the rights of persons with disabilities. I would also like to know more about the intentions of the government of Morocco to properly integrate the provisions of the Convention within the new framework law and in secondary legislation in Morocco to make sure that in as far as possible legislation is in line with the Convention and has a human rights model of disability. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ruskus, and I beg your pardon, Mr. Tadic, you have the floor now. And after Mr. Tadic is Mr. Martin, Mr. Shaker, and Mr. Bhutan. Mr. Tadic, you have the floor now.
Okay, now it is all right. Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Honorable Minister Hakawi, Your Excellency Charge d'Affaires, distinguished members of the delegation of Kingdom of Morocco, distinguished representatives of National Human Rights Council of Morocco, dear colleagues from civil society, especially Disability Movement of Morocco. Salam alaikum. I do hope I got those couple of Arabic words correct. I very much would like to take this opportunity also to express my appreciation to my dear friend and fellow Vice Chairperson of the committee, Mr. Busharu, as very able country rapporteur, and I thank him for his opening remarks. He set us on a good course. I also would like to thank Her Excellency the Minister and also the representatives of National Human Rights Council for their opening remarks. So you actually did give me cue to raise a couple of questions which I haven't thought of raising before the dialogue. I had some questions pertaining to initial report, but I have some additional questions. So my first three questions will go to Article 5. I refer to paragraphs 24 and 31 of the initial report of the State Party. And there you refer to provision of criminal code that prescribes that discrimination against persons with disabilities constitutes a criminal offense. Please provide information on number of persons that were charged and number of persons that were sentenced under those provisions. Jurisprudence is very important for us in the committee. In paragraph 81 of your initial report, you referred to the complaints submitted to the Office of Ombudsperson. I would like to receive updated information on the outcomes of those complaints procedures. What were the effects for the persons with disabilities who have submitted? I will, and this is my ad lib question, so to say, I will take the opportunity of presence of representatives of the National Human Rights Council, and I would like to ask them if they would like to provide us some additional comments on the effectiveness of legal remedies in cases of disability-based discrimination, so as sort of to complement what honorable members of the state delegation will reply to my questions. Article 6, women and girls with disabilities. As we can perceive for ourselves, committee from this year has only one but very capable female colleague, our wonderful chairperson. So after 5 of our dear colleagues finished their terms as officers last year, number of male experts did make a pledge that we will be raising the issues of women and girls with disabilities, and my dear friend and colleague Dan Lamy already addressed the difficult situation of women and girls with disabilities in the State Party. So I would like to ask the honorable delegation to provide more information on the legal framework for combating intersectional and multiple discrimination which women and girls with disabilities face. Last but not least, Article 9 is one of the articles of the Convention which I really love, and I very much express my appreciation to the Honorable Minister for paying so much attention to accessibility, because here I like to quote my dear friend and colleague, Mr. Altarwane, the inaugural chair of the committee, who said that accessibility is the backbone of the Convention, and indeed he was absolutely right. So I was very happy to hear about the project which your country did with the support of World Bank, and I would like to hear later on more about the effects of it. Really how accessible those 4 cities where pilot projects took place became after the project and funds from World Bank have been used. And to make it even more concretely for one aspect of accessibility, of course, I know that it is also information communication and public transport and goods and services open to the public, but I would like to hear if I, as a wheelchair user, were to visit your capital city, what would be the situation of support I would receive at the international airport? What would be a situation of accessibility of public transport to the city center? What would be the situation of accessibility of hotels for wheelchair users? And if I were to have a meeting with any of the government officials, what is the situation of accessibility of government buildings, especially if some of them are placed in beautiful historic buildings, how those are made accessible? Thank you kindly. Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. Tadic. And the next speaker is Mr. Martin.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be pretty short. Thank you very much to the delegation of Morocco for your country report, and mine is Article 8. I can see from your report there has been a convention training for disabled people in your country. This is great news. Can you please tell me what you have done to make sure people with an intellectual disability have attended this training? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for being so short and precise, and I would like to ask my colleagues to follow that example because we're really running out of time. Next one is Mr. Shaker.
Merci, Président.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Vous m'entendez là?
Can you hear me?
Okay. شكرا، أهلا وسهلا في المغرب الشقيق. وطبعا
I would like to thank the Kingdom of Morocco for this report. What Her Excellency said comes as no surprise to us, because Morocco has always been known as hosting numerous conferences on the African and Francophone levels, as well as international conferences regarding persons with disabilities. And we would like on this occasion to congratulate the sisterly state of Morocco for this the enactment of this new law on the rights of persons with disabilities. Some members of the civil society have some remarks regarding this law. They may not be too content, if I may say that. I would like to be very precise in the expressions I use. But as you know, dear brothers and sisters, the Moroccan Constitution invites members of the civil society to take part in all activities, especially persons with disabilities. And the Moroccan civil society indeed has proven that their participation has not been as effective in the preparation of the framework law. So, what are the mechanisms set by you to guarantee the participation by the civil society, so that they would feel that they do indeed contribute in building their society for the best interest and for the sake of a better future? What are the practical steps that the Moroccan government intends to take in order to bridge the gap between the laws enacted in order to provide access to persons with disabilities, to allow them access to means of communication, transportation, access to information, access to public institutions, and to have access to ICT, because persons with disabilities, be it visual or other types of disabilities, they need ICT. It's inevitable for their daily lives in order to integrate them better in their societies and in order to employ them and to guarantee a dignified life for them. I like the mistake committed by His Excellency the Minister. A slip of the tongue. She wanted to say support, but instead she said tears. Actually, what we want is support and not tears, madam. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Buntan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Very warm welcome to all delegations from Morocco to Geneva. And I'd like to commend the excellent work from the State Party in presentation, and also excellent work of the country rapporteur as well. My first question is from number 4, Article 4.3. To what extent has the State Party systematically provided support to enable persons with disabilities through their representative organizations to actively participate in formulating, implementing, and monitoring of laws and policies affecting the lives of persons with disabilities? And the second one would be from Article 5 on discrimination and non-discrimination, equality and non-discrimination. I'd like to ask how people, persons with disabilities who have faced intersectional types or multiple types of discriminations are being protected, especially those who belong to different sexual orientation, and many times these the way in which they are discriminated tends to intersect between disability and some other aspects as well. And the third one is Article 9. I would like to ask, in the accessibility law which was enforced in 2013, whether it has a provision on the sanction measures for those who fail to comply with the law, and whether they cover all aspects of accessibilities, including access to information and communication, and whether it has followed any internationally recognized accessibility standards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Muntan. And the next speaker is Mr. Langwat, please. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I just have one question, and that is a question connecting Article 4.3 with Article 8. And I would like to know in which way and through which means the Kingdom of Morocco is empowering organizations of persons with disabilities to become equal partners in designing and implementing awareness-raising campaigns aiming at creating a positive perspective upon persons with disabilities, especially children with disabilities and women with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langwat. And the next speaker, Mr. Kim. And after Mr. Kim, I have Mr. Pyunandi, Mr. Mwesigwa, Mr. Al-Saif. Mr. Kim, you have the floor now.
Please inform the committee more about how those public policy measures on the right of persons with disabilities are harmonized with other legislations. In particular, I'd like to request you to elaborate on the adoption of the framework law 997/13 and the integrated public policy for persons with disabilities. Please inform the committee once again to what extent, with the preparation of the framework, endeavored to uphold the principles of effective participation of persons with disabilities, their families, and their representative organizations. In a nutshell, I'm really asking you whether you have consulted TPOs in the preparation of the framework law. The TPOs are not very impressed about the way that they've been handled. I take this opportunity to thank you, Dalami, for your provocative overview of the situation, and also NHRI for your comments, and also the presence of NGOs too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. And now Mr. Pyunandi, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I equally join my colleagues to welcome the distinguished delegation, civil society, and congratulate my friend Dan Lamy for the good work he has done as conclusion rapporteur. I mean, at the outset, I would just want to tell the interpreters and even the delegation that we do not suffer from disability, but rather we suffer from discrimination. So therefore, the appropriate term is personne en situation de handicap et non pas personne souffrant d'un handicap.
So we should not say person suffering from handicap.
One question, Madam Chair, which is built on what my friend Rouscous touched upon earlier on, is la loi cadre, which is proved to be very controversial, and also what is called ICRAM 2, that is the National Action Plan on Gender Equality. I think we have information to the effect that women with disabilities have not at all been consulted, so which is a missed opportunity for women with disabilities to voice their concern regarding multiple discrimination, intersectional discrimination, and even discrimination by association. My question to you, therefore, how do you propose to remedy this situation by consulting with civil society and especially association of women and girls with disability, and give them a real voice in every action plans that you intend to develop? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mwezengwa, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Chair. I also want to congratulate the Honorable Minister for a very powerful address she gave us, and the entire delegation, and of course the very able counter-rapporteur. Now, Honorable Minister, during your opening address, you informed on various awareness-raising undertakings by your ministry to promote the CRPD in the Kingdom of Morocco. I would kindly request that you be more specific by naming the significant campaigns or mass public campaigns that you could really draw to us, to our attention, for us to know. Because you just said you had a lot of awareness-raising campaigns. And then, if you may also kindly, how many people do you think were reached by these campaigns? And then, to Article 9, accessibility. I want to thank you so much for the package that you gave me. That means when I'm going back to Kampala, I will go with less chocolates because they are quite heavy. But I also have some homework to do. I have to learn how to read both French and Arabic, because they are all in French and Arabic, and it's a problem. But one of the documents caught my attention, this one, and I want to believe that this is a National Accessibility Standards document for 2013. This is going by the sketches I found therein, of course. My question, therefore, is what are the consequences in place for non-conformity or lack of applying or implementing the accessibility standards as they are in this document to those who fail to implement them? Do they face any sanctions? Could you kindly give us some examples of some of those that have so far since 2013 been brought to book for not fulfilling these designs in this document? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wingwa. And Mr. Al-Saif is the next who has the floor. And then after Mr. Al-Saif, it is Mr. Kabui and Mr. Ishikawa, and then Mr. Basharo. Mr. Al-Saif, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask the Arabic language, please.
Peace be upon you all. I would like to welcome the Moroccan delegation warmly, and I would like to thank you for your presence and the additional information you provided us with in the report. And I would like to thank the civil society organizations in Morocco for protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. You mentioned in your report that the government will put a strategic plan and comprehensive legislation. I would like to know the characteristics of this strategic plan, and will it be commensurate with the breakthrough in the preservation of rights of persons with disabilities worldwide? My second question is regarding Article 8. Has there been a national plan to design the principles that have to be followed in the mass media in order to entrench the principles enshrined in the convention, such as marginalization, discrimination, and are there programs directed to achieve this goal? My last question concerns Article 9, namely to reiterate what my colleagues have said regarding accessibility. What has been done and what are the sanctions imposed on governmental and non-governmental organizations that do not comply with these standards? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kabui, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I also want to echo my colleagues' words of welcome to the Moroccan delegation. I have two questions to them. In the first place, it is clearly indicated, particularly in your response to the list of issues, that persons with disabilities are represented in the council, its structures, and its provincial or local branches. I'd like you to help us understand how those representatives are normally appointed and who appoints them. And with that, whether they are given any capacity to be able to engage within those councils. The other question I have is that questions have arisen as to provision of reasonable accommodation as prevention of discrimination. And in your submission, you have indicated that there is nothing that prevents judicial officers from considering absence of a reasonable accommodation as discrimination. Are there any cases where judges have agreed or have given reasonable accommodation as discrimination against persons with disabilities? The other question that is related to really the overall kind of situation is it's so commendable that Morocco has passed the law to say that treaties that have been ratified form part of the laws of Morocco and they take priority. In what ways has the convention itself influenced the laws, or more so the access of persons with disabilities to being able to defend their rights? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Ishikawa, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is about Article 9. Our committee, with its general comment on Article 9, recommends state parties to use public procurement policy to promote accessibility. This view is shared by accessibility experts in the civil society, such as G3ICT. And I understand that the government of Morocco has been working hard to promote accessibility. And the Ministry of Equipment equipment, transport, and logistics uses procurement regulation. I'd like to know that. And this type of procurement regulation can be or should be applied beyond the realm of the ministry, such as public site can be more accessible and educational textbooks can be more accessible with the use of public procurement method. So I'd like to hear more about your the whole picture of your public procurement policy to promote accessibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I had prepared some questions myself, but in light of the time shortage, I will not ask my question, but I will just reduce my comment to that I join my colleague Ruskush in his irritation about prevention measures in your state party report, because the CRPD is not about preventing impairment. It is about protecting the rights of those people living with disabilities. And I join my colleague Bhutan in his irritation about the confusion between having different sexual orientations and being a person with disabilities in your countries. According to the information we received, LGBTIQ persons are diagnosed as mentally ill and intersex persons are subjected to corrective surgery, which according to international human rights standards amounts to cruel and degrading treatment. With that, I hand over to our most excellent country rapporteur, Mr. Bashara, whom I join in his statement on Article 6 issues. Mr. Bashara, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll just quickly ask a question on Article 4.3. I'm sure many people have done that, but I think it's still very important to follow up. We understand that several bodies and agencies are being set up in Morocco now, but we're not sure what measures the government has for effective inclusion and meaningful participation of persons with disabilities in these bodies, particularly the Agency on Action Plan for Women, ICRAM. Yes, we know women with disabilities are part of that body, but we're not sure of how many women with disabilities are actually included in that body. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our first round of questions, and the honorable delegates of the Kingdom of Morocco have now 15 minutes to organize your answers, and I plead you to stick to those 15 minutes because maybe you also save some of your answers for tomorrow in the second round, because you will have 1 hour and 20 minutes tomorrow to answer all the questions also from the second round. So maybe you can combine something like that. Thank you very much. The meeting is interrupted for 15 minutes.
Il marche pas.
Welcome back, everyone, to the 338th meeting of this Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And without further ado, I give the floor to the Honorable Head of Delegation, Mrs. Hakawi, for answering the questions to the first round. You have the floor.
شكرا سيدة الرئيسة. شكرا.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And my thanks also to the distinguished members of the committee for all of the questions which they've put to the delegation. And my thanks for all of the comments denoting appreciation of the work that is done in Morocco. We welcome the fact that the committee is monitoring and paying close heed to all the projects underway in Morocco in order to promote the rights of persons with disability and ensure that they can fully enjoy their rights. This is an interactive dialogue, and in answer to Mr. Shaker, I can say that there is not a tear in the place. because we are working to make sure that all persons with disabilities can enjoy all of their rights and can be fully involved in all of the projects and seminars that we organize. We want participation to be the very backbone of all of the projects underway in Morocco at the moment. The State Party of Morocco has started working on participation and implemented participation even before that it was mentioned officially. There's a family code which conducted a dialogue with all stakeholders involved in civil society. In fact, I was a member of civil society myself at that time. There were further committees working in different areas where we saw participation, and today I sit before you in a position of responsibility. We cannot deny the importance of civil society and of how important it is to ensure that civil society fully participates. In fact, the Constitution enshrines this obligation. In other words, the participation of civil society involved in public policy and the implementation and drafting of bills. Many members of the committee took the floor to raise issues relating to civil society, and I wish to allay their fears. Their concern is our concern in Morocco in all areas of government. Civil society participation is one of our main areas of guidance. And in our introductory statement, we referred to such participation and involvement of civil society. We want civil society to be even more ambitious and to participate even more in the development of public policy and of legislation. It is an involvement which we do not wish to deny to civil society. We have to do what we can to ensure civil society participation at every opportunity. As proof of this, the reports and activities that we presented have seen the participation of civil society. Perhaps I can introduce or give the floor to colleagues from the delegation of Morocco so that they can give you more information on key concepts initially. We're then going to be looking at compliance of Moroccan legislation with the International Convention. We are, of course, here to undertake precisely this exercise, the harmonization of Moroccan legislation with the International Convention. I'd like to give the floor in the first instance to Mr. Ibrahim, who is the head of the Social Integration Unit for Persons with Disability. And I'll then give the floor to another colleague who will be giving additional information before Mr. Bajib from the Ministry of Justice takes the floor, who will shed further light on the notion of concepts of disability and harmonization. We have tried to transpose provisions of the Convention into Moroccan law, and you will hear more about this. Following the ratification by the Kingdom of Morocco of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and considering the harmonization of domestic law with the provisions of the Convention, well, the first law to promote the rights of persons with disabilities was adopted, and there was a question of making some definitions more specific. There are 3 definitions which are in fact inspired by Articles 1 and 2 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Now, the first is the definition of the person with a disability. The Kingdom of Morocco has adopted the notion of the relationship between the person and his or her environment. And within this definition, we consider a disability as a notion which evolves. We have avoided using pejorative terms in the definition. We have drawn from the concept of discrimination on grounds of disability. We have adopted this definition of disability and introduced it into the framework law. And it's a new concept in Morocco, discrimination on the grounds of disability. So disability can be material or behavioral, or it can be on the basis of a denial of service. This is a very important definition, and Morocco is very proud to be able to introduce this within the law. We particularly focus also on accommodation made to facilities, and we have included this in our definition. So these accommodation now as a notion is connected to disability and discrimination rather. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, Minister, Madam Chair and distinguished committee members. Speaking about to what extent domestic law is in line with the International Convention, we must first of all stress that the publication of the Convention in the official journal in Morocco fulfilled conditions ensuring that there is primacy of the Convention over domestic legislation and the provisions of the Constitution. The respect of the rights of persons with disability is the bedrock of this conformity. We have directly adopted some of the provisions in the Convention, particularly the definition. The state and the government are working to ensure that domestic law is in harmony with the Convention, and all of the work that the government is doing tends to this objective. And we are reviewing all domestic laws to see what needs to be repealed and what needs to be added to make sure that it is the laws are in line with international convention. Our efforts are indeed to ensure that domestic legislation on education and training, for example, are in line with the Convention. This is particularly important if we think about children with disabilities. There is a plan to reform the National Council to create a special mechanism, and this will be the monitoring and follow-up mechanism. We also have further plans relating to the criminal code, which will include a number of provisions looking to the protection of persons with disabilities. Thank you. Mr. Najib has the floor. We are still in the area of discrimination, and in this respect I can tell you that Moroccan law speaks about discrimination in general and discrimination on grounds of disability. This is mentioned in all laws, including the Penal Code, which very clearly lays down provisions on discrimination and criminalizes discrimination and provides sanctions, including custodial sentences of between 3 months and 2 years. This would cover cases such as the dismissal of a person with disabilities. The new Penal Code criminalizes and provides for sanctions in cases of commission of such crimes. Article 431(3) lays down that any conduct constituting discrimination or degrading treatment ought to be punished. Article 31(1) of this new bill provides for a sentence of between 1 month and 2 years in such cases, and this prison term can be doubled if there is incitement to hatred or discrimination, and fines have increased from 10,000 dirham to much higher fines, and once again harsher sentences if there's discrimination or incitement to hatred. Our laws our courts have invoked the International Convention in many rulings, notably ruling 686, which provides for compensation for persons with disabilities where sufficient coverage was not, or care was provided by a hospital. And there is a further sanction for an employer where an employee with a hearing impairment was dismissed. A third example, ruling from 2011, ruling number 1119, also sanctioning a case of discrimination and granting compensation to persons with disabilities. Now, we are still addressing general issues before we move to looking to specific sectors. So, turning to the issue of accessibility, and we want to tell you more about the work that is being done in conjunction with the World Bank and what the different ministries have been doing, notably the Town Planning Division and the Ministry for Transport and Equipment. But a representative for Ministry for the Family, Solidarity and Equality can tell us more about projects in areas of town planning. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, honourable delegates. The question of accessibility is of the utmost importance when it comes to promoting the rights of persons with disability in the Kingdom. We have an important legal arsenal on accessibility at the moment in the country. We have a law from 2003 on accessibility in communication and transport in urban areas. In addition to this, we have a law from 2016, and there are other administrative measures which focus on architectural structures and accessibility. Accessibility is an important component of integrated policy and public policy in general, and all sectors are committed to ensuring accessibility as part of this overarching cooperation programme with the World Bank 2012-2016. During this period, all projects were successfully completed in cooperation with the World Bank, as in fact the outcome report of this programme testifies. It's also a programme which put in place a national dynamic and which ensured that all sectors within government were able to work together. There was analysis carried out on accessibility needs, and studies and research was done in this area. There was cooperation in place to try and reach the goals and targets. The engineers and officials working in the architecture sector used training to try and train more officials to ensure better provision of accessibility. Marrakesh was chosen as the model city in this accessibility model. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Still in the area of construction, architecture and accessibility, there are provisions within two laws of 2014 which include measures for protection, and I can tell you that there is no construction undertaken if there is no compliance with accessibility requirements. Any public procurement takes place after calls for tender, and certain criteria must be complied with, including accessibility criteria for persons with disability. Town planning policies include accessibility. It's a policy which is implemented in conjunction with all stakeholders. There are development projects in urban areas which are compelled to take accessibility criteria into account. Obviously, in the technical specifications of a project, accessibility is also a factor. We have also introduced training modules, notably in the National Engineering School and our National Construction School and in the School of Architecture, to make sure that there is accessibility in all public buildings and in all government departments. This is part of our obligation to respect the criteria of accessibility. And as far as infringements are concerned, Law 6611 says that provides for sanctions of any infringements in architecture. It has been put in place since September 2016. There are fines imposed in cases of infringement, and even prison sentences can be handed down in cases of recidivism. And there can be fines of up to 200,000 dirhams. And those who are in charge of a building site or in charge of demolition works, etc., or rather those who are in charge of a building site can be fined or compelled to demolish their work if there is an infringement. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And Honourable Minister, as part of this integrated public policy to promote the rights of persons with disabilities, the Kingdom of Morocco has put in place a programme of work and an action plan to really ensure that we can have accessibility in public transport more swiftly. And this is a plan which is currently being implemented. All international standards have been adopted in air transport to make sure that persons with disabilities can travel safely. This is a system in place from the car park right up through to the aircraft itself. The government and the private sector have been working together, and accessibility criteria are abided by. There's a lot of work underway in this area, and we particularly see this in transport terminals, which are equipping themselves with all facilities for accessibility, including vehicles and all assistance needed by persons with disabilities. And we also have assistance services that have been in place and available to all persons with disabilities since 2016 in railways.
المعايير التقنية الوطنية المنظمة للولوجيات في هذا المجال، بالإضافة إلى إعداد دليل وطني لتجهيزات السلامة الطرقية مع تضمينه مقتضيات خاصة بالأشخاص في وضعية إعاقة. وضع أيضا رهن إشارة.
But there is no interpretation. We have a technical problem.
The chair does apologize. There was a technical issue. It is now sorted out.
Repeat the last sentence, but is it now operating? Thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm really sorry.
سأعيد من أما في ميدان النقل الطرقي العمومي.
Madam Chair, for public transport, road transport,
فقد تم إعداد المعايير التقنية الوطنية المنظمة للولوجيات في هذا المجال.
the national technical parameters to ensure access have been established. There is a national guide as well.
I'm really sorry it's not operating. Is it?
On road safety equipment.
Continue, please.
Okay. قلت في ميدان النقل الطرقي العمومي تم
So, as I
إعداد
was saying,
المعايير التقنية الوطنية المنظمة
for
للولوجيات
public
في هذا
transport on the
المجال
roads,
بالإضافة إلى
we
إعداد
have
دليل
parameters
وطني
for
لتجهيزات
access which have been
السلامة
established, and we
الطرقية
also have a guide for safety equipment for all road transport, which include the needs of persons with disabilities. This has been distributed to the different regional authorities. So we have integrated disabilities issues into the information contained for all those involved in road safety transport so that they have the human resources available. I hope that Mr. Tatic will find all the equipment necessary and fully operational. I'm part of the ministry responsible for this, so I'd like to just touch on one particular topic. One of the prime concerns that we have for persons with disabilities is education and health. So I would like to respond to the questions raised on schooling and education, and if there are any additions or supplements, then others can add their comments. On the right to education and vocational training, can I start by saying that the Kingdom of Morocco following ratification of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, opted for a strategy based on education. And Article 31 of the Constitution gives the right to all citizens to have full access to education. So this covers persons with disabilities, and we in addition have a particular chapter for persons with disabilities concerning the right to sign up to enroll in the nearest educational establishment, and then secondly, state schools should facilitate access for persons with disabilities. On implementation of these rights, well, in 2004 we had 34% of the rate of school attendance, and now we have nearly 50% of school attendance for persons with disabilities. So this shows the desire of families with children with disabilities to ensure the access of their children to the classical traditional education system. So there's no discrimination in our education system. We are also working to train staff. Morocco is living through reforms in the education sector as well. This was mentioned by the Minister. And our aim is to ensure that persons with disabilities have full access to education. And there's three priorities here: planning at all levels, all facilitation measures, and also the adaptation of programs and curriculum. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Madam Chair. In addition to the framework law on the protection of the rights of persons with disabilities, there are specialized centers which are part of the education system. There's a reforming approach we have based on integration, taking account of the kind of disability. We have a national plan involving training of teachers and school inspectors. We have amended, adapted the school programs, the curricula, and the school infrastructure as well. The Ministry is also endeavouring to adapt the evaluation assessment systems to meet the needs of individuals. The integration sections, which are part of education establishments, also create bridges with traditional education establishments. For 20 years now, efforts have been made to promote school attendance for children with disabilities, and we'll come back to this tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Boukidi, from the education sector. If there are no other comments on that sector, education, we could perhaps move on to a different topic. So we will move on to health now. Mr. Brahimi, you might cover this subject and answer the questions put on this, and then Dr. Wari will take the floor to talk about persons with mental disabilities, and then I'm sure we'll have an interactive dialogue on the different parts of the draft law currently before the Parliament. Madam Chair, turning to questions on the diagnosis of disability, the Kingdom of Morocco recognises that the convention we have ratified is one based on rights. Early diagnosis concerns prevention, secondary prevention, we say, to limit the impact. So it's not a prenatal diagnosis. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, Madam Minister, Framework Law 9713 includes many articles on prevention and also care for different disabilities. According to the definition of well-being, physical and mental well-being, mental health is an integral part of the care for persons with disabilities. In the context of adapting the provisions of the Convention in the Moroccan laws, we have Law 7113 on persons with mental disabilities and a royal decree on exactly this topic as well. The royal decree deals with awareness raising and training for doctors who are working with those who have psychological and mental disabilities. The right to carry out inspections, and there can be judicial investigations as well into any alleged abuse of the rights of persons with disabilities in hospitals. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dury, representative of the health sector. So, we have touched on several topics. We have answered some questions dealing with education and health. Perhaps we could come back with further details tomorrow. And one subject of particular importance where we have made progress is on women with disabilities. Women with disabilities can indeed suffer from multiple forms of discrimination, and any discrimination can impinge upon her rights, and so any gender discrimination can be added to any disability-based discrimination. So we could indeed talk about double or dual discrimination and double suffering as well. And this is indeed a challenge. So this is called upon us to face up to the issues, to try to help women to preserve their dignity, maintain their dignity, and to fully enjoy their rights. And so Morocco has been working for women's emancipation, for women's empowerment, and we have been doing this work for decades now. A new dimension was introduced in 2004 with the Family Code. Women with disabilities and their sisters enjoy full rights as others. When we talk about domestic violence and violence against women, we have detailed research projects which have provided figures and information on the situation of women with disabilities. This national research might not deal specifically with the issue of women with disabilities because this research gave quantitative data, so it gave non-disaggregated data, and there's other data from the health sector, and there's data on empowerment as well, and it's all related to the issue of women with disabilities. But if I turn specifically to violence, in 2009 there was research not specifically on the issue of women with disabilities. So this is why we need to ask for the research centres to focus on this particular issue. For months now we have been working with the OHCHR to carry out necessary investigation to make sure that this research can be conducted and take full account of the situation of women with disabilities. Some of the indicators to be introduced into the report cover the situation of women with disabilities who are victims of violence. And we have an integrated public policy which focuses on equality between the sexes, so it insists upon gender equality and equality between women with disabilities or not, so that all women have all rights. In the second ICRAM program, which is the National Equality Plan, which was launched with the assistance of the European Union, we are doing this. The first version was launched in 2012, and the second version of the same project started in 2016. I would also inform you that the Moroccan Parliament ratified the draft law on parity and combating all forms of discrimination. So now it will play a very important role because it will see discrimination against women with disabilities. And the Parliamentary Committee will be able to deal with all problems with a lack of equality or discrimination. So this will be a new mechanism within the institutional system in Morocco to work to promote further equality and equity, in particular for women with disabilities. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, as I come to the end of this first interactive dialogue, I wish to welcome the high quality of this debate. I'd like to give you some good news in the context of this interaction. To add to what the National Rapporteur has said, when he mentioned the Marrakesh Treaty, this is a treaty which facilitates access to documents and publications for persons with disabilities, including the blind and those with visual impairments, so that they can have access to published documents. This is an agreement ratified on the 28th of June 2013. I think you know that there are lengthy procedures in our country, which means that the Parliament must ratify such a treaty. The Parliament has just done this, and as the government, we are now going to prepare ourselves for the last stage of ratification and to promulgate this. So we are very proud that we have been able to host the negotiations on this treaty, this important legal document, and our own ratification process will be completed very soon. So that's the good news I wanted to share with you. Madam Chair, we are meeting here today to discuss the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the degree to which Morocco is in conformity with the provisions of this convention and how we implement it through our laws, but also how we are working dynamically to implement the convention. Since the ratification of the convention in 2009, we have carried a huge amount of effort. There has been a really dynamic trend. You will see that a great deal has been done since 2009 to promote the rights of persons with disabilities. There is a real rhythm to our work, and you can see that there's been a real increase in the tempo of our work over the last 5 years as we've moved to the real operational phase of implementation. And this is going to be really focused on over the next 5-year period. I do apologize that we weren't able to translate all documents in time into Braille. We wanted to have documents translated from Arabic and French and into English. The document on our national research into the situation of persons with disabilities, that is. But we do have that in Braille as well, and 2 other documents as well. So this is just a start, but it demonstrates our interest in making sure that we use this means of communication as well, so that we can be sure that information is conveyed directly. And we're sure that this will have a major impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Head of Delegation, Mrs. Hakawi. I give the floor now to the representative of NHRI of Morocco, because you have been asked by colleague Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Tatic. And for a short answer, I give you the floor now before we open the second round of questions.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you, Madam Chair. The National Council of Human Rights thanks the members of the committee for their pertinent questions. On the question put by the committee on appeals, as an appeal mechanism, by the 30th of July 2017, we had received 211 complaints and allegations of the violation of the rights of persons with disabilities. 80% of them concerned the access to the right to inclusive education, in particular enrollment in school, adaptation of programs and exams, denial of the right to take part in extracurricular activities, and exclusion from school on the basis of a disability. The law of March 2017 on exams has been a subject of complaints from different families with children with disabilities. We were able to deal with several of these complaints and requests with the regional academies for education and training, but other ones could not be resolved successfully. On the issue of women with disabilities, the National Council wishes to inform you that in our 6th thematic report on equality and parity in Morocco, making the constitutional objectives operational, the National Council analysed the situation 10 years after the reform of the Family Code and 4 years after the promulgation of the Constitution and 20 years after the adoption of the platform. This report looks at equality and parity in access to economic, social and cultural rights of women and the impact of public policies on the most vulnerable women, in particular women with disabilities. This report concluded that discrimination on the grounds of disability is exacerbated by sexual identity or gender, and we see that we do not see women empowered, and that women are suffering from discrimination, and this is complicated by a situation of poverty.
I thank you very much for that information, and now I open the round for the the floor for the second round of questions on Articles 11 to Article 20. Article 11 to Article 20. And the first speaker is Mr. Martin. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One is on Article 12 and 19. Can you please tell me how you are putting in place Article 12, including removing guardianship laws and putting into practice supported decision-making in line with General Comment Number 1? What work has been done to make sure that people who have their legal capacity removed know about and understand their rights around this? Can you tell me if this information is available in accessible formats as easy read? Article 19. I am concerned to read that disabled children who are abandoned or who have no family may spend their whole lives in institution, with many not going to school. Please advise the number of disabled children living in institutions in your country, and if there is any work being done to find homes in the community for these children. Is Morocco looking at starting the process of closing institutions for disabled people? If so, what is the planned time frame for achieving this? I encourage you to move towards closing down institutions you have in your country. You have the opportunity to look at how this has been done in other countries and use what has worked well and avoid the mistakes that others have made. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. And the next speaker on my list is Mr. Tatic. And after Mr. Tatic, I have Mr. Rushkus, Mr. Shakir, Mr. Langwart. Mr. Tatic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Your Excellency Minister, members of the delegation of Kingdom of Morocco, shukran for your replies to my questions, and especially great thanks goes to the representatives of the National Human Rights Council. I am really happy about this opportunity for our committee to interact with national human rights institutions. It's one of the things we place great value on, and this excellent example how it is done. I have 4 questions in this cluster. First question is on Article 11, and I would like to know how the information on natural disasters is made accessible for persons with sensory impairments and persons with intellectual disabilities, persons with psychosocial disabilities. Second question would be on Article 13, and in a way it follows up on the exchange of questions and information about the sign language. I would like to hear very concrete data on number of sign language interpreters that are available to deaf citizens of Morocco in judicial and in the administrative proceedings in your country. My second question on Article 13 refers to paragraph 78 of your initial report. You wrote about the training of judiciary, and I was very happy to read about it. please could you provide updated information on the outcomes of those trainings and if it's continued on a regular basis, which would be the preferred solution. Last but not least, Article 19, and you will be receiving in the next, I think, few days, a general comment number 5 on Article 19, living independently and being included in the community. And I will ask one very practical question. What are possibilities for a person with disability who needs 24-hour per day assistance, 7 days a week, to hire a professional personal assistant who will assist him or her in that person's daily activities? And I'm telling you because I'm actually one of those persons who need assistance around the clock. I actually need 2 personal assistants. Without them, I wouldn't be able to be here and to contribute to the work of Committee, interact with you. And with all that, I wish you a very nice evening. I know that we have given you quite a lot of work, and I'm looking forward to our continued dialogue tomorrow. Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. Tadic. And the next speaker is Mr. Rushkus.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm concerned about the situation of persons with psychosocial disabilities and mental disabilities in Morocco. I'm concerned about the state of enjoyment of their rights. And this covers 2 articles of the Convention for me. Article 12. Paragraph 66 of the initial report cites the 2004 law on family code, stating that the limited legal capacity of a child, called a prodigious child, or one of like a mental capacity, is someone who has a mental disability which prevents them from being able to control their acts. I'd like to ask you to inform members of the committee about the way in which you would amend these discriminatory provisions and to introduce provisions which would allow persons with mental disabilities to enjoy exercising their legal capacity in the same conditions as all others. Article 14. The state's report is silent on the issue of persons with psychosocial disabilities, including those in institutions. As far as I know it, those with psychosocial disabilities are pretty much abandoned or placed in centers which are psychiatric hospitals or centers for persons with mental disabilities. I'd like to know how many men, women, boys and girls are in these institutions. I was a little bit irritated by the information provided by the Moroccan Association on Human Rights, Bouya Omar, which talks about the mentally ill, where we see that the persons are chained up or beaten, and so we see in the report that the situation of those with mental disabilities is really vulnerable. I'd like to know what measures the Moroccan government is taking to make sure that those persons who have disabilities, who are detained, can enjoy their rights. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Shaker. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I shall speak about Article 13 to ask you, dear friends, whether you could indicate to us or confirm to us that prison staff have been trained so that they respect the rights of persons with disabilities and, of course, respect their rights to have access to justice and to benefit as well from means of expression in Braille and sign language as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Langward, please. Oh, and after Mr. Langward, I have Mr. Rukledev, Mr. Kim, and Mr. Pionandi. Mr. Langward.
Thank you very much. I have experienced for many years that governments are always looking upon what they do, and organizations of persons with disabilities are always focusing on what are missing. But I have I have never experienced that governments and organizations of persons with disabilities has seen things with that distance as I have in this situation by the interventions from the delegation from Morocco. I think you should take this opportunity to be receiving concrete, implementable and needed proposals for speeding up the development of giving persons with disabilities their right and their place within your society. Having said that, I would like to know a little bit more on where persons with disabilities are living when they are living in institutions. How big are those institutions? What kind of persons with different kinds of impairments are living together? What kind of age-appropriate accommodation is available? And what kind of support within your community would be needed to speedily reduce or eliminate the number of institutions and allow for full inclusion within the community for those persons that today are deprived of that right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langwaard. Mr. Rookledev, please.
Thank you very much indeed to the representatives of Morocco for the detailed information. I'd like to ask for some clarification. On Article 11, there is no official status of Moroccan Sign Language, then how can information be conveyed to the deaf about major royal decrees? Then under Article 12, to what extent in Morocco are the rights of persons with disabilities, including the deaf, protected for property and management of their finances and access to credit and loans? And also, do persons with disabilities have the right to make sure their property is not arbitrarily seized or taken away from them? Then, are the services of sign language interpreters made available for court proceedings for the deaf? If so, then who pays for these services? And do national organizations of the deaf take part in accreditation of such interpreters? Thank you very much indeed for the time you've taken to come and have this discussion with us.
Thank you, Mr. Rookledev. And now Mr. Kim, please.
Two questions around Article 16 and 19, simple ones. What are the offences? What offences are included under exploitation, violence, and abuse, etc.? I mean, you talk about repeated offences, etc., but we don't know what those are included. Are children and women with disabilities adequately protected from violence or indecent assault upon them? Do you happen to have any documented data on them? Moving on to Article 19. On Article 19, the state report deals with many family solidarity fund, guidelines for assessment maintenance, transport-related services for persons with disabilities, etc. But there is no mention of deinstitutionalization and independent living at all. What are the issues have to do with institutionalization, the issues that I mentioned earlier? I am afraid I cannot enlighten myself about the present situation of institutionalization in your country, such as how many persons with disabilities live in institutions, whether you have any plans for deinstitutionalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. And next speaker is Mr. Pionandi, and after Mr. Pionandi, it's Mr. Kabui, Mr. Buntan, and Mr. Al-Saif. Mr. Pionandi, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have made very little progress. I heard both the interpreter and the representative of the delegation have stopped using the word, in quote, souffre de handicap. And I hope very soon they will stop using concepts such as les malades mentaux, mentally sick. So my question is going back to the basic of the issue raised by my friend Rouscous earlier on, is that this loi cadre, the law, the organic law, has proved to be very controversial because in the context of Article 13, it doesn't at all address the issue of procedural or age-appropriate accommodation. So my question is, how do you propose to address these issues in the following context? Number one, when, for example, women are deprived of their liberty and institutionalized in the context of persons subject to torture or cruel and degrading treatment, or in the context of people suffering from exploitation, violence and abuse. So if you have not been able to address that in the La Loi Cadre, could you at least commit yourself as to what you would do about these critical issues relating to civil and political rights? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pionandi. And Mr. Kabui, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Chair. And once again, thank you, the delegation from Morocco. I had a few questions, but my colleagues have asked, so I'll ask only one question. And this relates to Article 13 on access to justice. There has been in the documents we have received from you the provision of sign language, the idea of physical facilities of the justice places to be made accessible. But to access justice, one of the major concerns is to receive legal services, legal assistance. Even training the judges is not enough, but we need to have people with disabilities accorded legal assistance, particularly where their rights are violated. Are there possibilities for such legal assistance in Morocco? And if so, what kind of cases have been prosecuted in areas of the rights of persons with disabilities? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kabui. Next speaker is Mr. Buntan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I'd like to begin my second round of questions with Article 11. I would like to know the current status of a national plan or program on disaster risk reduction, whether it reflects the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which persons with disabilities are actively involved and are included in all aspects, and whether the state party has signed the Charter on Disability Inclusion in the humanitarian action. The next one is from Article 13. What measures has the state party done to promote, support, and empower persons with disabilities to work in the field of justice in order to help enhance greater access to justice by persons with disabilities? And my last question is, under what circumstance can involuntary or forced abortion and or sterilization upon persons with disabilities be legally allowed in Morocco? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buntan. Mr. Al-Saif, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And أشكر الوفد على الإجابات الضافية للأسئلة المجموعة الأولى. سؤالي هنا
My question
يتأكد على فيما ذكره الأخوة سابقا فيما يتعلق
has to do with Article 11.
هل ثمة تدابير معينة
Have any measures been taken or any legislation enacted to protect the rights of persons with disabilities in case of humanitarian crises and cases of emergency? Regarding Article 13, and in conformity with what my colleagues have said, courts or any legal authorities, do they assign sign language interpreters for representative if they need them? And have any similar services been provided? And my other question, after you have provided some examples, would you please give us specific cases of examples of people with disabilities who have been subjected to cruel or inhumane treatment, especially women with disabilities? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Saif. And before I turn the floor back to the country rapporteur, I have some questions myself, and they relate to Article 13 and Article 12. Article 12 is on legal capacity and Article 13 on access to justice. And in your State Party report in paragraph 66, you inform us about Article 216 Family Code, which says that according to that law, persons with intellectual disability are seen as legally incapacitated and they are put under guardianship. And Article 12, as you know, says that legal capacity is a human right and that all persons with disabilities need to be regarded as a person with legal capacity before the law. And state parties have the obligation to provide access to support if that person needs this in order to exercise legal capacity. So are there any plans in Morocco to replace guardianship laws and other forms of substitute decision-making regimes with supported decision-making regimes? And do you involve civil society in this? In paragraph 70 to 83 of the State Party report, we find lots of information on access to justice in Morocco, and I found that information very useful. But the question is whether it is all in compliance with Article 13. For instance, there is information on a Code of Obligation and Contracts, Article 3 to 13, as well as Family Code, Article 206 to 276, which says that in legal proceedings, representatives are appointed for people with disabilities who are deemed legally incapable. And Article 13, as we understand it in this committee, demands that people with disabilities are enabled to participate in legal and administrative proceedings themselves as agents of their own rights through the provision of procedural and age-appropriate accommodations in order to facilitate their effective roles as direct or indirect participants. Apart from some measures relating to interpretation for deaf persons, I cannot find any information on such measures. For instance, easy read interpretation for persons with intellectual disabilities, accessible courtrooms, documents in accessible formats, disabled judges themselves, etc., so on. Are there any plans in this regard? And then I have a question on Article 16, and it relates to violence against women, which has been elaborated upon already by our excellent country report. I do not find any information in your State Party report, nor in the replies to the list of issues, on any measures for the prevention of violence, especially sexual violence, against women and children with disabilities. As you know from research and also from various reports by the Special Rapporteur on the prevention of violence against women, we know that disabled women and disabled children are 3 to 4 times at a higher risk to be victimized by this kind of violence, especially if they live in institutions or in patriarchal cultures. Often there is no access to service which can help victims of violence. Are there any plans regarding prevention of violence against women and children with disabilities in families and in institutions? And I also would like to know, is there any monitoring mechanism according to Article 16, subparagraph 3? Thank you very much. And with that, I turn the floor to our most competent country rapporteur. Ms. Bashara, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, and thank you, delegation, for your answers. I just have 2 quick ones on Article 12 and 16, just follow-ups. On Article 12, could you provide us data on the percentage of petitions submitted to the courts with regard to inability to marry in respect of persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities? And on Article 16, too, a follow-up. Could you provide data on the number of cases of violence and abuse in hospitals and places of detention of persons with disabilities throughout the country, with particular attention to the detention center at Buya Omar, and whether the State Party would be facilitating the release of persons with disabilities in that center, either to their families or to properly provided living arrangements in mainstream society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes our round of questions for the second round. And Honorable Head of Delegation, distinguished delegates of the Kingdom of Morocco, we have given you a lot of work for tonight. We look forward to your answers tomorrow and wish you nevertheless a good rest tonight. Hope you will get some sleep, and the meeting is adjourned.